Most men are emotionally stunted and overemphasize logic. And in this video, I'm going to talk about how popular philosophies like Stoicism are used as a continuation of emotional repression. And I'm going to use a fascinating but sad case study on a guy who lost his sense of emotion, and we'll see what happened to his life as a result of that. And by the way, at the beginning, I do want to stress this video isn't anti-male. I am a men's activist, I am a men's coach, and I heavily encourage men to embrace their masculinity. I despise the narrative that many men have had to put up with over the last 5 or so years post Me Too, where masculinity has been bashed and men have basically been told that they shouldn't be like men. But what I am going to say is, unfortunately, most men across the board of all ages lack emotional awareness. They lack emotional regulation, and that is something that we can change. So, as a starting point, Stoicism, right? How is this used as a way of repressing emotion? A lot of guys, they misinterpret Stoicism. They basically think it means that you become this guy who is totally unfazed by anything and you don't experience emotion, particularly negative emotion. You'll notice that a lot of the time, guys that think they're Stoic, they're not actually applying Stoic principle to positive emotions and things like lust. It's normally just the negative emotions, and they're actually just repressing the way that they feel. They're denying normal parts of what it is to be a human. Stoicism is about processing your emotion and understanding that you can control and that you can't. It isn't about repression. It's more about understanding your emotions and then not being completely consumed by them. Very, very similar principles in Buddhism. But many guys seem to think that you just don't really experience these things as a result and you repress it, which is just completely wrong. So to outline what happens when you don't experience emotion, the story that I mentioned, there was a neurologist at UCLA called Antonio Damasio, and he did a study on a guy called Elliot. Elliot is a fake name, as is the case in most case studies. Now, Elliot had a very good job. He was a successful businessman. He had a stable partner, he had a stable marriage for that matter. Life was good, very intelligent guy. And he developed a tumor that caused damage to his frontal lobe. And after this, his life started falling apart over time. He got fired from his job after he failed to perform. His marriage fell apart. He then got married with somebody else who his family despised and was completely incompatible with him. And then they ended up divorcing as well. He got involved with a money-making scheme and his life completely fell apart. He went bankrupt and he ended up staying with a sibling. And Damasio was studying this guy as he went along. And he was studying him from the perspective of IQ and intelligence. And they tested Elliot to see what was going on. They saw his IQ was still perfectly intact. He wasn't stupid. He wasn't ignorant. He was still very intelligent. He could still process things. But then one day, Damasio noticed something that gave it away. He noticed that when Elliot started talking about the way his life had fallen apart completely, he spoke about it like an objective spectator. There was no feeling to it. It was completely neutral in the way that he spoke about things. So in response to that, they started doing other tests on him where they showed him pictures of horrible, horrible things, really gruesome events like buildings that were catching on fire, like really gruesome pictures of car crashes and just things that anyone would look at and would feel distressed by. And although he could recognize intellectually that these pictures were distressing, he didn't actually feel anything about it. It didn't really bother him. And this was why he got fired at work, because he couldn't make decisions anymore, right? He would take hours and hours and hours deciding basic things like how to file his papers, what order they should do it in. And all of these things, when they came together, what Damasio realized was that when your emotion is impaired, so too is your decision making. And you'll often hear guys, me included, I put my hands up, they will criticize others for reasoning from emotion, and particularly they'll criticize the way that they often perceive women as reasoning from emotion a lot more. And don't get me wrong, there is a problem with both men and women in the present day, a certain group of them reasoning entirely from emotion and really just ignoring the role of logic whatsoever. We've all seen this, like particularly with like it's woke people primarily, but it does actually exist across the board, left and right. But there are people today who are overly focused on their emotional reasoning and basically the polar opposite of Stoic, right? And that's not a good place to be with this either. But what a lot of guys seem to ignore is that emotion is actually important, right? There is a reason that we experience it. It helps us to make decisions ourselves. It helps us to understand things and process what's going on. It helps us to understand and form connections with others. So you can't neglect your emotion. You can educate yourself on it and you can improve your EQ and your emotional reasoning, but it isn't something that you can ignore. And so many guys seem to think this. And I'm going to give you another short example of this, another little story based on something that recently happened in my life. So I was in a business partnership with a guy who was about 20 years old, and he's an ambitious bloke, right? Very ambitious bloke, was generally quite agreeable, but unfortunately the business partnership didn't work out and it came to an end. And when it came to an end, he went into a total emotional meltdown and really lost his cool and was like shouting down the phone at me, like personal insults, started bragging about him being more stoic as well, which is part of the reason that I was inspired by this, because he, you know, it's quite funny hearing this, but he was like, I am more stoic than you, you're emotionally out of touch. And this is the thing, right? There are a lot of young guys, particularly the younger guys, who seem to think this, right? They've got this misunderstanding of what Stoicism is, and it leads to them having this false perception in their head of their own resilience, when actually they are just as prone to their emotions as anyone else. And they're afraid to recognize it and they're afraid to speak about it. And now to move this onto the broader scale of things, men in general, so many men, they are afraid about recognizing their emotions and doing emotional work. And the next point that I want to make with this is where this gets complicated in today's society. So one of the biggest problems we've got, particularly with men's mental health today, is there's this narrative push that basically men just need to be more emotional. They need to be more vulnerable, and also they need to be more like women in the way that they talk about their emotions, aka you need to feel loved and feel vulnerable, which has been shown time and time again now by a number of male psychologists, or well, not just people studying male psychology, to correct my phraseology, that actually this doesn't tend to work for men, particularly with things like depression. Men generally need to feel empowered with the way that they're doing things, like sitting and dwelling in your emotions doesn't actually make you feel better. But the problem is that at the same time, this comes from the fact that many men are emotionally repressed and are at the polar opposite side of that, and they will not talk about their emotions whatsoever. They'll completely joke it off. They'll judge other men for it, and they're afraid of speaking about their emotions. So what's actually important as a young man, and here is the solution, is you need to start doing your emotional work, right? You need to learn about the wheel of emotions. You need to learn about things like nervous system regulation, right? You can intellectually teach yourself about EQ, but you actually need to apply it as well. And you could work with men's coaches on this. You could actually work with men's therapists, making sure that they are a men's therapist who actually understands these things, right? They do understand how men operate, but you do want to do the work here. You do want to start understanding your emotions and how you respond to them, so that you don't end up being caught in the vices, which is where a lot of men end up. They either end up like being completely out of touch, and men who are normally completely emotionally out of touch and have no control, this tends to manifest itself in anger and aggression, which is something that a lot of men experience. It's passed down through the fathers, and we all know this, like X's and boomers in particular Jesus Christ, I mean, the boomers more so, the most emotionally repressed people you will meet. And as any Gen Z or millennial man will be able to tell you what their father's generation is like and the way that they've been. And you can see that in the way that they behave today, particularly on the internet, and just the irrationality of it, right? That is one of the vices that you can end up with. But then on the flip side, you can also end up with these people where they basically just become this autist, or like they're completely oblivious of the fact that there is emotion involved in things, and that yes, it is completely fine to understand your emotions and recognize that they influence your decision making. And this is particularly important when it comes into relationships, when communicating with women, right? You need to be able to communicate your emotions with women, not so that you are making her validate you and making the woman your mother who takes things over for you. That is not what women want. It's going to put them off. Some women, they like to be maternal with their partners, but like, if you're coming to your girl with emotional problems and you're not actually solving them, you're not doing the work, that is going to be a red flag. An emotionally unstable man will make a woman feel insecure, and especially as you get older, a woman is going to look for security in a man. So look, this is a general summary, a general summary of where we're at with things at the moment. Many guys, they are overly focused on the intellectual side of things, and sure, understanding philosophies and Stoicism, Buddhism, whatever it is, right? These are great things. They can help you to learn and process your emotions. But remember, there is a balance here. You don't want to repress your emotion. And by the way, if you are a man who is looking to improve your resilience, improve your emotions, get in touch with your masculinity and improve your life, this is exactly what I help my clients with. If you'd like to learn more about that, there's a link in my bio where you can book in an initial discovery call with me, which is basically where we chat to see whether we can work together and how I might be able to help you. But aside from that, I hope you found this video helpful, and I will see you in the next one.